Hi, my name's Justin Stairs. This is the Brussels Signal studio, and you are watching our Elections Week special coverage. Today's subject is the Green Deal. We all like to believe we're moving towards a more sustainable future, but are we doing it too fast? Some groups say yes. One of those groups, for example, is the farmers. They brought Brussels here to a standstill earlier this year. There are other issues regarding the economy and competition and energy. Europe's still heavily dependent on imported fossil fuels, for example. Is this the right time for the Green Deal, especially when you consider the Ukraine war? We've got some guests, some specialists to talk about this subject. And what do you think? Are you a Green supporter?
The quest to combat climate change has been the main focus of the European Union under the leadership of Ursula von der Leyen. At the centre of this mission is the so-called Green Deal. Whipped out of the Commission sleeve after the 2019 elections, the project was backed by the large majority of groups in the European Parliament, with only the hard right daring to raise objections. As a result, the von der Leyen Commission has been characterised as the greenest in history. How climate-friendly the EU has been over the last 5 years remains up for debate. While senior Eurocrats have often lauded their own green measures, in practice, much of Europe's fossil fuel-reliant production has been outsourced to third countries such as Morocco, which don't have to listen to Brussels. The obligation to reduce emissions to zero by 2050 has caused enormous problems for European industry, resulting in substantial productivity losses. Europe has also banned the sale of combustion vehicles from 2035 onwards, except for certain high-end vehicles for the wealthy. All this has resulted in the EU struggling to obtain the energy needed to run its economies. The traditional model of relatively cheap fossil fuels has been made to give way to an energy mix driven by renewables, especially wind and solar, which have up until now struggled to meet the demands previously fulfilled by hydrocarbons and nuclear power. Energy costs are rising. Europe's working and middle classes find themselves becoming suffocated financially. All the while, environmentalists are pushing for more and more costly measures aimed at saving the planet. Meanwhile, neither China nor the United States seems to be following in Brussels' footsteps. Is the Green Deal necessary for Europe, or could climate change have been averted using different, less costly methods?
Right then, here we are with our two guests. We have one in the studio and one online. In the studio, we're very happy to have Frank Schwalba-Hoth. Frank is one of the founders of the German Greens, one of the first members of the Green Party in the European Parliament, and the former head of the EU Office of Greenpeace, former president of the Greens in the European Parliament. In fact, that's a rather long accolade. We have online Alexandra Rybinska, a journalist and commentator at the Polish weekly Świeci. And
Yes.
oh, thank you. I got that right. And she also works for the Warsaw Institute. Let's get going. We're here to talk about the Green Deal. Now, here we are in Brussels. Very close to our office is Place Luxembourg, where not long ago the farmers came along. They shut down the Brussels European Quarter, which is very unusual. And it seems as if they achieved at least part of what they were looking for, in that after the protests, EU leaders, including European Commission President von der Leyen, started talking about maybe we're going too far, maybe we should cut back on some of these pieces of legislation. And they seem to have won their case. Were they justified? Is the Green Deal going too far, too fast? Frank, you're first.
I'm in love with the Green Deal. Totally in love, because it is not enough when we are confronted with climate change, problems with biodiversity and other challenges, only to have punctual legislation. It is necessary to have an overwhelming strategy. You call it Green Deal, Sustainable Deal, Future Deal, or whatever. I would have chosen Sustainable or Future Deal. To make it easier for planning for the population, for the industry, for all stakeholders. And I don't think it was too fast and too far in general, but in some sectors certainly. But this is nothing static. It is something which is developing step by step. And therefore, I think it's justified to look if all these parts of the Green Deal are necessary now or a little bit later. But I think we are condemned by God, Allah, destiny, Buddha, or whoever to do something like this to prevent that we can live in dignity and solidarity and peace on this continent, on this globe.
Alexandra, are you in love with the Green Deal?
No, quite the contrary, I have to say. I think
wonderful.
I'm not against fighting climate change or protecting the environment. I should stress that before I start talking about the Green Deal. But I just don't think the Green Deal is the right way to go. It's overambitious, 1 trillion euros, a lot, even for the European Union, who has a tendency to produce overambitious projects. It's going to be expensive also for European citizens. We will have a new phenomenon called energy poverty. In some countries, we already see it. And if you want to see what the Green Deal is going to look like, look at the energy transition in Germany and the way companies are fleeing to the US or China, especially from the chemical industry. It was very using up a lot of energy. So these companies are basically relocating somewhere else. So we're all going to pay the price for this overambitious project, which is not going to give, well, any effect. And why not? Because the European Union is responsible for greenhouse gas emissions globally, for about 7 or 8% of these global emissions. So even if unilaterally European Union becomes climate neutral in 2050, it won't make any difference on the global scale. That's the first thing. The second thing is the Green Deal makes the assumption that everybody else is going to follow suit. So the European Union is ready to sacrifice itself, to give an example, to become the leader of a global green movement, which might not materialize. And all the, well, competitiveness, industry production, everything is going to disappear somewhere else, and we will be left with nothing. Solar panels, by the way, are a good example of that. It was the turn of the century where Germany, European Union, invested enormous amounts of money in solar panels. Who produced them? China, because it was cheaper to produce. The European Union and Germany had no profits from that. So there are many dangers inherent in this Green Deal. And I like what one of the German experts said that I listened to on television. And he said, you know, this whole Green Deal is like jumping out of a plane with the elements of a parachute. And either you're going to be able to put them together while falling down, or you're going to crash and burn. And the probability that you're going to crash and burn is much higher. And then you'll manage to put that parachute together.
Thank you, Alexandra. Frank, there are many points in what Alexandra just said, but can I just focus on one to start with, and that is the energy poverty issue. I mean, we've all seen energy bills go up for whatever reason, but is it not the case that the Green Deal, green policy in general, in fact, can only really work for rich people in rich countries? It's all very well if your bill goes up and you can afford to pay it, but what do you say to the people who can't afford the increases in their energy bills?
Always in society, if you have a change from one system to another one, sometimes it's difficult, sometimes it's less difficult to change from horses and carriages to cars and paved streets. The change now from hydrocarbons, petrol and others, to renewable energy. That is not something small which you can do without paying for it. And it's the responsible of the governments, and European Union to avoid that something like what you called energy poverty is harming people. And the secret background of all of this is that in the mid and long term, solar energy, wind energy is less expensive per kilowatt hour than coal, gas, or even nuclear. That means in the very short run, you will see that renewable energy will just have the opposite consequence, not energy poverty, but getting down the prices. But the counter-argument, which is true, the energy distribution system, traditional one, is based on the fact that you have 10, 20, 30 big energy providers and millions of people who are linked to the grid to get it out. And now we have it already, hundreds, thousands and millions of small producers, a solar panel, wind turbine, geothermal, small water hydropower, and still several million of people who get it out. That means this whole grid system has to be changed. It is changed. And I think the people who get here in Brussels the most gray hair are those who are working for the European Association of Grid Operators, because this whole grid has to be changed, and this can't be paid by the consumer. It has to be paid by the governments. Then that is the duty, as it was when cars came.
Right, I see
to build the streets.
I see your point.
Yeah.
And Alexandra, what Frank is basically saying is, right, it's going to be a painful change. He recognizes that, and the poor should not be hurt by this change, which means government subsidies. How do you respond?
No, pardon, not subsidies, government investments.
But the poor people who have the bills, though...
In investments in the energy structure.
Right.
To avoid that the price for the consumer would be too high.
Okay, so there's some kind of price control, that means?
No, intervening into those costs which the energy producers and providers are then asking from the ordinary people.
But wouldn't that automatically involve some kind of subsidy, though? If the government...
The word subsidy is here not the right. You might use it, I don't use it, but let's listen now to her.
Some kind of government intervention.
Yes.
Government
intervention.
Let's call it government intervention in order to protect the poor. Alexandra, over to you.
Well, we just had this kind of government intervention during and after the pandemic, and the Polish government, for one, has given up on it. Starting from July, this kind of regulation of energy prices, because that's what it was, keeping them lower, is going to stop. And people already know that their energy bills are going to rise between 45 to 100%, which is huge. And people that are poorer cannot afford this. And of course, there's renewable energies, there's wind energy, there's solar energy. The problem is the storage of electricity coming from those energy sources. And the grids are not, designed to actually store and also distribute this kind of energy. It causes a lot of problems. It also causes problems between countries in Europe, where this electricity is sent, for example, from a German grid into the Polish one. So all these problems have not been solved until now. And we just don't have the technology, really, at least now, to solve them. So this is one of the problems why this is not really a solution for now. And the energy bills are going to rise now. And if you want to know what energy poverty looks like, we have people, pensioners mostly in Poland, that already cannot pay their bills. And in winter, they go and drive around in public buses because the buses are heated. So they drive around in heated buses all day because they can ride it for free. And then they go home to sleep. So they warm themselves on city buses. I don't think this is a solution that we really want. When I was in Brussels recently at the end of April, and I was at the European Commission, where we were told, we're a group of journalists, that the emission trading system, the second part of it is going to be implemented soon, is going to worsen this problem of energy poverty. So what the Commission has found as a solution is to create a special social fund to help those that are going to be, the poorest, that are going to have difficulty heating their houses. So this for me is a little bit like, I'm from a socialist, former communist country, and we always used to say that in a wonderful communist system, the Communist Party created problems that it then had to solve. And this is a little bit the case with this social fund. You first create a problem, and then you have to create a fund where member countries will have to pay into. And you know very well that there are many countries in the European Union member states that do not want to pay more into the budget, whether it be for a social fund or anything else. So I don't really see this as being a viable solution on long term.
Frank?
Yes, I think it's too polemic what you say. I have my doubts that it's really like this, that people stay the whole day on the bus. And I don't think it's justified and to compare the European Union with the communist regime.
Okay. Listen, in fact, as we're on this subject of renewables, I'd like to go now to Philip Pilkington, who is an Irish economist and host of the Multipolarity podcast, because he will start us off in a discussion of the technology and the role renewable energies can play. Let's hear from Philip.
Well, it would be, in the short term, it would be the end of the war, and then it would be the decision on the part of Germany, it would have to be Germany, to start importing piped Russian gas. Apart from that, it would need a long-term solution. So you'd need to build out a new energy grid to replace the energy grid that's being lost. Now, there's only really two ways that I can see to do that, unless experimental green energy tech can prove what it's supposed to do, but it currently does not. The other two options are coal and nuclear. Now, the issue with nuclear, which I think a lot of people are coming back around to take a second look at, thankfully, we should have more nuclear in Europe, in my opinion. But nuclear takes a very long time to build. I think it takes about 10 years to build a nuclear plant. The Chinese can build them slightly faster, but not under current EU regulations. And then the other option that's slightly quick, I suppose you could call it the quick and dirty option, is to build coal-fired power plants. Now, I think you can build a coal-fired power plant in about 3 years. The Chinese can actually knock them together in 18 months. They famously build a lot of these things, but of course, this speaks to current tensions around China as well. So the coal energy plants seem to me to be the quickest potential proven technology that we could bring online immediately. We can get access to that coal. Cheap coal from Australia. We could even reopen coal mines in the Ruhr Valley or something like that. But the objections on an environmental basis to coal, whether misleading or not, I think coal energy has got cleaner in the past few years. They seem to throw up roadblocks. But again, even if we said, okay, let's go hell for leather on coal, we're looking at 18 to 36 months to get a coal power plant online. So we'd need a mass building program as soon as possible. And even then, we'd be facing down probably stagnation until we got that new energy up and running.
So that's Philip's point of view. And one of the key points he was making there, Frank, was that essentially today, renewables can only play a small role in Europe's energy mix. We are dependent to a large extent still on not only on fossil fuels, but on imported fossil fuels. That is the case, is it not?
No, I loved very much what he said. I was totally in love, and I felt beamed back in the past 42 years ago when I was one of the first Greens in the state parliament of Hessen. I was there, the responsible for energy from the Greens. And exactly these arguments were used 42 years ago and some years later as well. Coal. The number of people who are dying in the coal mines because of lungs full of dust, those people who are suffering, and this is all of us, because of CO2 emissions from coal, the general climate question linked to coal and CO2 is disqualifying coal as an alternative. Nuclear, he's totally right. You need a lot of time for a nuclear power plant to build it. And then it's a question of the waste. When you look on the waste coming, especially the plutonium. Look, imagine this would be a plutonium. It would be enough to pollute the whole population of Warsaw or of Brussels. And after 24,000 years, it had lost half of its radioactivity, and you would only have enough to kill half of the population, but through lung cancer. And I don't think that we have the right, the moral right, to produce through this waste problem. I don't speak of a nuclear accident, that's something else. A problem for people in 98,000 years. The pharaohs was what, 5,000, 6,000 years ago. I don't think that for our energy production, we have the right to create problems for future generations.
Are there not, there are new types of nuclear energy now? They say they're safer, no?
Yes. It is the same with all sectors of economy. If there's criticism, like with suffering because of tobacco, that you have then softer tobaccos, softer smoking, but it don't change, or alcohol, softer alcohol, less alcohol, or whatever. No, it is a dead-end street nuclear as well. And if you look on Spain, on Germany, there have been moments of last year, 2023, that all of the energy in Germany and in Spain came from nuclear, a mix of solar and wind turbine. I remember 42 years ago when I spoke in Parliament of wind energy, laughing in front of me, oh, Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, these wind turbines, windmills. No, it is now a high-tech technology, and he's totally right, the storage is a problem, but the whole innovative spirit in the society and in business and in science are looking now for storage capacities, like, for example, even using the car, which is overnight loading, as a sort of battery. There are a lot of possibilities for battery, and I'm very happy that he's pointing the finger on these challenges. But we have seen in the last 40 years that most of these challenges we had an appropriate answer, including the price and including the energy independency of Europe.
Alexandra, the energy mix, I know this is a bit of a controversial subject in Poland, isn't it? You're about to build nuclear power stations. Has there been an agreement with the US? What's going on over there?
Well, there's been obviously an agreement, but we're not building it so far, because the new government of Prime Minister Donald Tusk said that the construction of this nuclear power plant has to be pushed back in time. And as we already said, the time frames are long usually for the construction of such a power plant. So it might happen in 10 or 20 years. It's still quite far removed in time, because if they haven't started on it yet, it's still just a project, then it'll take a long time to actually materialize. But yes, Poland is thinking about nuclear power plants actually since the 1960s. It's a subject that has been discussed. And already in the 1960s, there were plans to build such a plant, but luckily they didn't, because it would have been a Chernobyl model nuclear power plant. So we know what happened at Chernobyl. So luckily it was pushed back in communist time. So now it's back on the agenda because, yes, Poland is reliant on coal to a large degree. The part of coal in the energy mix is becoming smaller, but it's still relatively large compared to other European Union member states. And of course, you want to move away from coal, but it has to be done in a sustainable way. With sustainable, I mean it cannot damage our economy. And I know that when I listen to, radical climate activists, they usually say the degrowth is something that is not only expected during the energy transition, but it's something that is to be desired. There should be no growth. There should be, we should consume less. But, every government has to think about its citizens that it represents. And I think we don't want to create poverty. We don't want to create degrowth and create a situation where turning away from coal really suddenly is going to actually make it impossible for us to produce. I mean, we have a very energy, an industry that uses up a lot of electric energy and so on. So we still use gas, we still use coal. So we have to think about that. And I don't think there's really a problem with the storage of nuclear waste. These methods of storage are becoming more and more modern. There has been no accident or leakage in decades. And I think all of this is exaggerated. Even the European Commission admitted that nuclear energy is green energy, essentially. So I understand. I know the Greens in Germany were always against it, and Germany has actually shut down its own nuclear power plants. But this has also generated additional problems and has also made energy bills go up once again. I think Germany has the highest energy bills in all of Europe for the end consumer. And as I already said also at the beginning, this starts to be a serious problem for the German industry. And when I look at the debate in Germany, I can see there's a lot of worry about what is going to happen to the Standort Deutschland, that's how it's been called, so to Germany's competitiveness, if this continues. So this can create serious problems, and we cannot just make decisions based on ideology or moral reasons. I cannot force my own industry as a leader in a country into bankruptcy and people into energy poverty, because in 24,000 years somebody's going to have a problem with the nuclear waste that we have stored, or because it's morally the right thing to do. I don't think that should be part of the consideration.
Okay, let's say, Frank, there are a couple of points there.
No, I loved what she said. Everything has to happen in a sustainable way. But I don't like that you mix those who are for renewable energy with those anti-growth voices, and that you call a value-oriented policy ideological. Value and ideology is something different.
But what about the degrowth, deindustrialization? Hold on, let me finish my question.
Sure.
There are German industries who are doing very badly at the moment, some of whom are talking about moving out of Germany because the energy costs are too high, energy-intensive industries in particular. Are you happy to see them move? Do you think it's inevitable that they move out of Germany? And what about the degrowth claim? If these policies, the Green Deal and the like, if they result in recession, is that acceptable?
No. When I'm in a situation like this, I always try to enter into the mind of the person who is my opponent. If I would be industry leader in Germany, I would say, I think I have to move to the US or to another country. But not because I want to move over there, but because I want to have assistance from the government. And this happened now. One of the big steel producers got a check, it's about $1 billion, to change the gas-driven steel industry by hydrogen-driven. That means it is now in a moment, like on a camel market or carpet market, you come with a strong position and you know the other will give in and hand something over.
It's a negotiating tactic.
It's a negotiation tactic to get support, and this is even than subsidy, support from the government.
Okay. Now there's one final point. This has been great. I want to carry on with you two on this final point, and it's connected, but it's also about the war. Now, let's hear Philip talk about Europe and the war economy, because he has some interesting points.
If LNG from Qatar and the United States was so attractive, why weren't we shipping it in before? The simple reason is because it's far more expensive. Piped gas just runs through a pipe. You build a big pipe, it's a huge sunk cost, and then you run gas through it, and the gas just goes in one side and appears out the other. LNG needs to be compressed into liquefied form. That's why it's called liquefied natural gas. That compression technique costs money. Then you need to put it onto big ships, very, very large ships with kind of dome structures, look a bit like the Millennium Dome in London. You pump it on there, and then you send it slowly but surely across the sea in this ship. All of that costs far more than just sending gas through a pipe, and that's why pipe gas is generally better. I've seen varying cost estimates of how much more it is, but I think reasonably speaking, we can say it's about 40% more expensive. Now, 40% more expensive isn't 5% more expensive. 40% more expensive LNG is exactly what's feeding into the higher energy costs for European industry. The fact of the matter is, for example, Chinese industry has access to much cheaper gas, actually mainly the Russian gas that isn't coming to Europe anymore. And so it's getting a 40% discount on its gas. With their lower labor costs as well, it's not clear how we can compete with that.
Okay, now one of the key points he made there was that we are weakened. Our high energy costs and our dependence on imported energy weakens the European economy and would make it difficult or even impossible to move towards a war economy if that were necessary. For example, in the case of war with Russia. How do you react to that point, Frank?
I have problems to follow this argument because in a war, in a modern war, which we might be confronted, we are vulnerable if we have 10, 15, 20 power stations, nuclear, coal, or whatever. They could be, you see it now in Ukraine, eliminated, and then there's no energy. But if we have a decentralized energy system on the roofs, on the wind turbines, okay, you can shoot the wind turbines, but to have a decentralized energy structure in a situation of a very dense conflict or a war, slow steps or terrible steps in a war, you are much more independent.
Fair point. Alexandra, do you have anything to... I know that in Poland's on the front line there. Is energy dependency a big issue?
No, not really, because we have made sure that we are independent from Russia in terms of fossil fuels and all the rest. We've got a Baltic pipe that connects us to Norway, so we've built it, and we're getting most of our gas and so on from Norway. So we have diversified, and I think that's not really that much of an issue. Of course, if we would go into a war with Russia, yes, it could attack our coal plants, it could attack, whatever. That is certainly true. But I don't think that the question of Europe being at war with Russia is really that relevant today. I mean, the first thing that should happen is that Europe should support Ukraine sufficiently by sending it weapons, by sending it money, so that it can win that war with Russia, and therefore give us peace for many, many more years to come. We don't know how many years that might be. We don't know what Russia might do, because Russia is quite, it's difficult to calculate Mr. Putin's next move. But the fact is, Europe is not doing even that. So that's the problem that we have to solve now, and not think about what we're going to do if we are at war with Russia, because I don't think that's going to happen, at least for the next couple of years and maybe more. So what Ukraine needs is support now, and you can see that Europe is hesitant. That's the first thing. I mean, it took Germany a very long time to send the weapons that Ukraine asked for. Same goes for France and other players. So that is, I think, the main problem. And the second is Europe has scaled down its defense industry in a considerable way over the last 2 decades. There was or 3 decades even, there was a conviction of the end of history, of the fact there will be never again any war in Europe, that we don't live without threats, that we don't need these big armies, we don't need that big production of arms, of tanks and everything else, and especially ammunition. And now we suddenly see that Europe cannot produce quickly enough and enough volume to be really able to support Ukraine. And I think there has to be a change in that matter. But in order to rebuild the European defense industry, in order for it to thrive, we need cheap energy, and that is true. And we won't get it from wind turbines and solar panels.
Frank, what's your position on the Ukraine war?
I don't want that Ukraine is losing the war. And I think we have to do everything which is necessary to support Ukraine. And it's totally understandable that after these years of peace since the end of the Cold War, we have reduced our defense efforts considerably all over Europe. And now that we have to change this policy, it takes time. But if you see on the sums of money and the amount of weapons which are delivered, this is unique in history. It is comparable to what happened at the second half of the Second World War. A support that came mostly from the US to the Allied forces. And we see something very, very similar. And I think Ukraine will be able to resist against the Russian aggression. And I think we are on the right way. And if you see on the European Union, there will certainly be, after the new Commission building, there will be ministries, we call them general directorates, and there will be certainly a general directorate to deal with the question of armament. There were even ideas to have a European defense, or whatever word will be used, commissioner, which we haven't had now. Because what I love with the European Union is the following. Every time there's a conflict, a problem, the European Union is finding an answer to this. In the 80s, awareness for environmental problems, the EU developed environmental policy. Later on, the war in Yugoslavia, the banking crisis, always the EU enlarged their scope of activities. And then now with the COVID epidemic, we will have in the new treaty a revision, the basis of the European Union activities, certainly something about to fight against COVID and something else, to be more active in the field of defense, to have not the obligation that the rule that one country can stop decisions, anonymity.
Right, this is getting rid of the veto.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
Abolish this right of veto. And I think the European Union will see it at the end of this year with the new Commission, will structurally as well be more capable to support the Ukrainian cause.
Okay, one quick question and then we'll finish. Let's go with you first. Should Europe be prepared to send troops to support Ukraine?
No.
Because?
If you send troops, it would be totally justifiable in the Russian logic to attack European territory as well.
Escalation.
It is a step of escalation which is not necessary.
Alexandra, same question.
No, I think it should give Ukraine the means to fight.
Okay.
Which doesn't mean soldiers on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think
it's
sure. Then we are on the same
There we go. We're going to
wavelength.
end on an agreement between you two. That's great. Alexandra, Frank, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. That was great. And thank you for watching this Brussels Signal Special.